กลับเข้าสู่ NIA Virtual Studio ของเราในเวทีฟอรัมนะคะแล้วก็การบรรยายในช่วงต่อไปนี้จะเป็นเรื่องของ EdTech นะคะแต่ก็ไปดูในส่วนของ Economic Crisis ค่ะจะเป็นมุมมองของ OECD นะคะหรือว่าองค์การเพื่อความร่วมมือและการพัฒนาทางเศรษฐกิจนั่นเองค่ะเมื่อพูดถึงเรื่องของการลงทุนด้านการศึกษานั้นก็แน่นอนนะคะถือเป็นการลงทุนเพื่ออนาคตของทุกประเทศแต่ระบบการศึกษาที่ดีในมิติของ OECD นั้นคืออะไรนะคะและการศึกษากับวิกฤตต่างๆมีผลกระทบต่อกันหรือไม่มากน้อยเพียงใดอย่างเช่นเมื่อเกิดการเปลี่ยนแปลงด้านเศรษฐกิจและสังคมที่เราเห็นอยู่ทั่วโลกนั้นจะทำให้ธุรกิจการศึกษาต้องมีการปรับตัวแบบไหนอย่างไรนะคะหัวข้อในช่วงนี้จะเป็นเรื่องของการศึกษามาตรฐานใหม่ที่โลกต้องเรียนรู้ไปด้วยกันค่ะ And now moving on to our next session, which is titled Education Competency Leading by New Baseline of Technology Equipped Learning System, which is co-hosted by Educa. We are very delighted to have the Director for Education and Skills and Special Advisor on Education Policy to the Secretary General, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD Paris, joining us. So now I'd like to welcome Mr. Andres Schleicher, who's joining us through Zoom. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to join you here. Obviously, these are very difficult times for education. At the height of the crisis, 1.5 billion students were kicked out of their school because of the pandemic. And the one thing they understood is that learning is never a place, but always an activity. And that also we need to do better in integrating technology and education in the future. Now, remote learning became the lifeline for success for many young people, but schools were not yet ready for this. At the same time, I think we've also seen a lot of innovative learning environments emerging, many teachers really being very much at the front line of innovation. But think about how our world has changed through technology over the years. When you think about, teaching people to read in the year 2000, that was very simple. That was about extracting, text from printed books that were carefully curated, approved by governments. When you didn't know the answer to a question, you could look it up in an encyclopedia, and you could always trust that answer to be true. Well, in the year 2020, when you don't know the answer to a question, you look it up on Google, and you're going to find 100,000 answers to your question. And nobody will tell you what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is not true. In a technology-based age, literacy is no longer just about extracting knowledge. It's about constructing knowledge. A very, very different kind of skill set. Vast changes of technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, cloud computing, social media, dominating the world. But when you actually look at the OECD, we regularly measure the skills of young people in our PISA assessments. We have seen almost no progress in the industrialized world. Basically, the line has been flat. This is the worry that we should be having, that our world is advancing and our education systems are standing still when it comes to the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values that matter for the future. Only 1 in 10 young people could distinguish a fact from an opinion in a complex setting. Now you can say, well, that was a little bit better than in the year 2000. But again, we live in a totally different world. Fortunately, there have always been some countries that have been moving fast. If you look to 4 regions in China, they have moved to the top. You can see Singapore also moving from good to great. You can see Estonia in Europe actually also advancing very rapidly. Portugal and other European countries catching up. So some countries have been moving forward, but not that many. At the lower end of the performance scale, South America, you can look to Peru or to Albania, again in Europe, or Brazil, steadily advancing, or Turkey. We have also some countries, like Sweden, where actually things went in the wrong direction for many, many years, but then suddenly they reprioritized education and got the country back on track. So there are also some countries which have, re-emerged in the 21st century literacy skills, but not that many. So this is basically where we end up. And you can see also Thailand as a country still with a lot of work ahead of it to prepare young people with the skills for the 21st century. Some people say, well, that's all about, adding more learning time to school, making school days longer. And here on this chart, you can see the time that students spent in school in blue and the time they spent learning out of school in yellow. And yes, there is a lot of difference in this. Now, you can look, for example, to the United Arab Emirates as a country where students spend close to 60 hours learning per week. And you contrast this with Finland, where this is just a little bit more than half of that time. Huge differences in the volume of learning time. But when you look to productivity in education, how much do students actually learn in each hour? You can see in a country like Finland, students learn a lot in very little time, whereas in the United Arab Emirates, they spend a lot of time and learn very little when it comes to 21st century skills. And also Thailand still has a long way to go. It's not about just making school day longer. It's about, teaching and learning in different ways. Time is not a good predictor for success. Now, here is a good predictor for success. What we measured is actually the growth mindset that young people have. And you can see where actually students, develop a strong growth mindset. They believe that, education is owned by them. They basically can, their effort and their hard work will determine their outcomes. You can see education systems also being much more successful. You can see this difference. And again, you can see a country like Thailand where many students still believe, well, educational success is about, talent. It's about, social background, not about, the environment in which I can actually flourish myself. This is important. And it comes also important in the 21st century. Students with a stronger growth mindset were more likely to be motivated to master difficult tasks. They had a greater sense of self-efficacy. And they were less afraid of failure. Think about in the 21st century, we want our young people to be creative. Well, if you want to be creative, you have to experiment, you have to try things. If you try things, you have to take risks. If you take risks, you look likely to make mistakes. If our education systems are not good in helping young people, learn from and with mistakes, well, they're not going to be very creative probably. You can also see students with a stronger growth mindset were more likely to establish ambitious learning goals and see greater value in school. So those attitudes and dispositions are not just a nice to have, they're really, really essential. Why do I say this? Because that's what the technology-based world actually asks us to do. It was just about a decade ago, 10 years ago, young people got those little smartphones into their hands. Soon after, the real world and the virtual world began to integrate and everybody got connected. But while some things got much simpler, other things became much, much more demanding in terms of the knowledge and skills. And, we have actually asked 15-year-olds in our PISA assessment how they feel if they're not connected. You can see the majority of boys and girls say, I feel really bad if I'm not connected. Now, in Thailand, that's almost, over 70%. Not being connected is like, being connected is like drinking water and breathing air for young people these days. It's not an add-on to schooling. It should be the heart of schooling. So let's think about how technology can amplify and scale innovative teaching. First of all, we still do very, very little in this field. When you look, for example, at the market capitalization in education and you compare that with the health sector, you can barely find education. The health sector has a huge industry around this. There are big companies, inventing tools and technologies. Doctors work in a highly sophisticated environment. In education, that's still a foreign world. Just imagine. Less than 3% of global education expenditure today is on, technology, and I would even say also innovation. It's likely to grow. By 2024, we expect that share of expenditure to grow in absolute terms and also in relative terms, but it's still a small percentage of the overall investment in education. Where is the money going? Augmented reality, virtual reality is a big part of it. And that's no surprise. I think augmented reality provides so interesting learning environments these days. Why do you want to listen to the results of an experiment from a teacher when you can actually do that experiment in a virtual laboratory? So augmented reality, amazing capabilities, artificial intelligence, robotics, and blockchain just emerging. You can look at those in more detail. When you look, for example, one thing that technology can do really well is to make learning more adaptive, more personal, more interactive. And that's very important because students learn differently and sometimes differently at different stages of their development. As a teacher in the classroom, it's very, very hard if you teach all students in the same way. But technology can augment that teaching. It can actually see how different students learn differently and then adapt the pace of learning to their individual needs. It's also something that we do now in our PISA test. We no longer give everybody the same test. We actually have a test that adapts itself to the abilities of students. So it gives students very relevant tasks. Personalizing learning is a huge kind of promise of modern technology. Some of the modern learning system, while you study science on them, they will actually study you. They will see, what makes you interested, what makes you boring, where you're good at, where you need to learn, and then they adapt the provision for this. Assessment and exams. When you think about, tests, you think about, a bubble sheet where you have to check the right answer that somebody else thought out before. Actually, modern exams work in a very different way. In the medical sector, we have already, virtual reality providing real life kind of experiences where students can actually do something and will be observed by, technology-based systems. We have hands-on assessments in vocational settings, looking at practical skills of people. We can use technology to mark exams, open-ended exams, where students do not check the right answer, but they have to produce their own answer in a very authentic way. And actually, technology is becoming actually reasonably good at scoring those kinds of answers in a reliable way, almost as reliable as humans can do that. So once again, in the past, testing and learning were two separate worlds. And, teachers didn't like really tests because they steal time away from learning. Well, in the future, we can integrate the world of learning and the world of assessment. While you learn, the computer is going to give you feedback, and the feedback then can help, students learn better, teachers teach better in schools to become more effective. And we're seeing those things emerging. Classroom analytics. Yeah, if you go today, to cities like Shanghai, you'll find a lot of really advanced technology sensors in the classroom, which actually track very carefully how students learn. And they do that in real time. And they give teachers very important clues. A teacher gets a window into 40 students, basically seeing, where they get interested, where they get bored, where they are on their activities. And they, as a teacher, you can see, for example, if your students make similar mistakes, well, maybe I should explain something once again, or get an understanding when I should shift to the next activity, when I'm losing the attention of many students, how I should structure my instruction time. Do I do a lecture, a small group discussion, assessment? Classroom analytics has become a very, very powerful tool to actually help, teachers see how different students learn differently and then adapt their teaching. It's not replacing teaching, it's actually making teaching stronger. That's, I think, the secret of technology, that it is actually, amplifying good teaching without, replacing teachers. It actually makes the work of teachers much, much more important. As a teacher, you don't have to just be an instructor these days. You also have to be, a good designer of innovative learning environments. You have to be a good mentor for students, a good coach, a good facilitator, a good evaluator. Those are the roles of teachers in this technology-rich environment. Robotics. We see a lot of examples where students, do coding and then can implement their instructions with a robot. Social robots are also emerging. Maybe not yet, at a scale that it's interesting. But, I think in the future, that may be another technology. And then last but not least, blockchain in education. I think this holds a lot of promise. Today, we learn for many years, and then we send students to an end of school exam where they have 1 or 2 days under a lot of pressure to produce all the knowledge they have. And that's not a very, very good, incredible process, signaling once for a lifetime what you've learned in school. In the future, we will probably be learning in smaller chunks, and make those small chunks of learning visible and connect that so that you, over your life cycle, you can actually build your own knowledge and skills. Employers will not just see the degree that you got, once early on in your life in a university or in school. Employers can actually see, or you can show to employers what you actually know today and can do. And blockchain technology can link all of that information in a reliable and integral way. That's, I think, a very, very important technology that will, give rise to micro-credentials, give rise to different ways of learning, learning at the workplace, learning in different places. So I think it will give many people today in the world who have great skills, but who did not get degrees for this, the way to show what they can do. Very, very important. Now, the pandemic has actually accelerated many of those trends. In a very short time, people were forced to actually, think more hardly about how to use technology. When we surveyed schools in May this year, only 22% of education systems from the 36 countries that we surveyed wanted to go back to where they came from. Over 50% see hybrid models of distance and classroom-based learning as the new normal. This is something really interesting, where you can basically see that the digital world and the real world become one. As a teacher, you have to decide, what do students learn best in the classroom, and what do they learn best through technology. You can use the classroom for discussion, for debate, for interaction, while the transmission of knowledge is something that actually technology can take over at home or elsewhere. Now, of course, technology is only as good as teachers use it. And you can see actually the use of technology today is still very limited. Now, only about half of the teachers say they frequently or always let students use technology for projects. Some countries like Denmark, New Zealand, Australia, this is more. But even, a high-tech country like Japan, a very advanced country, teachers are not comfortable yet with technology. But you can also see in a number of countries there's been good progress between 2013 and 2018. If you look to Sweden or Romania, Israel, Finland, Croatia, you can see the share of teachers using technology has almost doubled, or more than doubled, in 5 years. So things are advancing, but a lot more needs to be done. Let me conclude with a brief outlook on not just the how we use technology, but what do we need to learn for a technology-based world. Some people have called this a race between education and technology. Now, before the big industrial revolution, neither technology nor education made a big difference for the life of most people. But then came the industrial revolution, moving technology ahead of the skills of people, and causing huge amount of social pain. People were not prepared for those new paradigms of the industrial world. But, then we built our schools and actually moved people ahead of technology. That was actually what schooling has achieved, making people compatible with the ideas and norms of the industrial society. But today we face the same problem. We have the digital revolution coming up, moving again, technology ahead of skills of people, and causing again this amount of social pain. Some people leave university with a good degree and cannot find a good job. And at the same time, employers say they cannot find the people with the skills they need. How do we close that gap? That is the challenge of our times. How do we move the skills of people ahead of the technology of our times, the digital world? Knowledge is expanding just dramatically, and it's filled with so many facets and features, and they all come with people. That's very important. Knowledge is never, or learning is never a transactional phenomenon. Learning is always a relational phenomenon. We learn from and with people. And the world of schooling is very small compared with this. And we try to put everything into this little box. But what often happens is that the rich features of the world become very shallow shadows of themselves. That is the problem that we often have. If you survey, primary students in Thailand, they're all enthusiastic about science. Science is about observing nature, experimenting, understanding cause and effect. If you survey them again at age 15, many of them start to hate science. It's become a boring world of formulas and equations that have actually very little to do with the nature of scientific inquiry. And we put more and more and more things into this box, and we forgot actually what makes us different from technology. Our education systems have, become very good at, developing, second-class robots, people who are very good to repeat what we tell them. But in this time of artificial intelligence, we need to think much harder what will make us first-class humans. The knowledge, skills, the attitudes. Student agency will be at the heart. Learning is no longer passive consumption of content. Learning is about agency, developing the capacity to advance your own world and together with others. Of course, knowledge is always important for this, but we need to think beyond disciplinary knowledge. Of course, you need to know something in physics and chemistry, but can you think like a scientist? Can you think like a mathematician? Can you think like a philosopher? Can you think like an historian? That is becoming more important. Can you think across the boundaries of subject matter disciplines? Look at problems from different disciplinary angles. That's important. And knowledge is just the start. The world no longer rewards you just for what you know. Now Google knows everything. The world rewards you for what you can do with what you know. Cognitive skills like creativity and critical thinking are important, but also social and emotional skills. Curiosity, courage, empathy, leadership. Those are very important. If you ask me, what are the most important competencies these days, it's to do with creating new value. That's obviously important. It's to do with managing tensions and dilemmas and navigating ambiguity. Our world is no longer black and white. It's about taking responsibility. Basically, mobilizing our cognitive, social, and emotional resources. That is the what question for this technology-based world. We can use technology for learning, but we also need to learn for a technology-rich world. Now, if you look at our data from our latest teacher survey, you can see education is not prepared for this. Teachers are good in clarity of instruction. They explain to students what they expect them to learn, how to new and old topics are related, and so on. But when you think, less than 60% give students tasks that require them to think critically, or have students work in small groups, or let students to solve complex tasks. Those 21st century learning practices are still quite rare. So summing all of this up, what we need to do is, first of all, advance from teaching young people something towards giving them a reliable compass and the tools to navigate with confidence through our increasingly complex, volatile, ambiguous world. It's about complex ways of thinking, complex ways of working. In the past, we only needed to educate a few people well because our economies only needed a few well-educated people. Today, we need everyone. That's the challenge of our times, to make education fully inclusive. And it requires a very different caliber of teachers. In the past, we used to tell our teachers to, exactly how to teach and what to teach. Today, we need a strong profession of teachers who become creative designers of innovative learning environments with immersive technology. And of course, those people don't like to work in a factory. We've organized our schools still like, little factories. In the future, they will be more flat, more collegial, more entrepreneurial. Teachers will work with a higher degree of professional autonomy and in a collaborative culture. These are difficult challenges that are ahead of us, but we can master them. And technology is something that can be a hugely informative and productive force to amplify the work of great teachers. Thank you very much.
Mr. Schleicher, for the presentation and for the insightful knowledge from wherever you are. Thank you so much. เอาละค่ะนั่นก็เป็นเรื่องราวดีๆนะคะจากคุณอันเดรียสไลเกอร์ซึ่งก็บรรยายนะคะในเรื่องราวในแง่ของการศึกษานั่นเองค่ะการศึกษามาตรฐานใหม่ที่โลกต้องเรียนรู้ไปด้วยกันนะคะในช่วงต่อไปค่ะเราก็จะมาดูอีกเรื่องหนึ่งกันแล้วนะคะจาก EdTech นั้นเราจะไปสู่ GovTech นั่นเองนะคะเป็นเรื่องของ Government Action for Post-Pandemic Recovering จะว่าด้วยเรื่องอะไรอย่างไรกันนั้นนะคะเดี๋ยวเรามาติดตามกันในช่วงต่อไปนะคะแต่ช่วงนี้ขอพักสักครู่ค่ะ